Hey guys, so we're going to be setting up Jest today so we can start testing our code. Now, before I begin with this stuff, I just want to mention I'm pretty new when it comes to testing GraphQL stuff, and testing in general I don't do a ton of. So I really want to get feedback from you guys as I'm doing this, how you would do it and what you think of this approach. And my goal with this is to basically cover the most amount of code with the least amount of tests. So what I was thinking is doing some kind of like integration type tests. So we'll get into like what those tests are in a second. Let's first start to set up Jest. So here is the Typescript Jest version, and we're going to be using this because we're using Typescript. So here is the installation for it. We just have to install Jest, Jest, and then the types for Jest. And these are all dev dependencies, so I'm doing -d. And then after that, I'm going to copy this bit right here, and this is just from their GitHub page for Jest. This is just, I guess, specifying what in our package.json over here. So underneath scripts, specifying that we want to use Jest and whatnot, and that to look for Typescript files. Alright, so we have this set up nicely. And so the first thing I was thinking was creating a folder, and I wasn't sure if I should put this inside of source or not. I went ahead and put it inside of source. So I'm gonna just say tests, and okay, I already have a folder here, cool. So I have a folder called tests, and I'm gonna call this register.test.ts. The .test is for Jest, so it knows to basically that this is a test. And there's one other thing that I wanted to set up in package.json real quick. In scripts, I'm going to say test, and we're just going to run Jest. So now I can just run yarn test, and it will run Jest, and Jest will test our code. I want to just like basically get the hello world running to make sure that's all good to go. So I'm going to just copy, this is from the getting started from Jest. So I'm going to copy the sum, and I'm going to copy this test. Okay, so here is Jest testing to make sure that this sum function works. So the way we run this is by saying yarn test, and it'll now run Jest for us. And we should see this little output, and we passed, so we're good. So that means if that worked for you, you have Jest correctly set up. So next thing is I want to start testing the code. And what I was thinking was using this library here called GraphQL request. It's really handy. What it allows you to do is just have a query like this, and then I can send a request to a server. So I'm thinking I don't want to just test the resolvers like this. So I could, for example, call this function here, but like I said earlier, I want to test as much code as possible. And I think in this case, a better way to do this would be to send a just GraphQL request and then check, make sure everything works. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to install this library, and this just makes it easy to send basically GraphQL requests to our server. So we're going to copy that, yarn add, and what I'm going to do here is we don't need this sum function, and what I was thinking is I would start the server and then basically just query it with GraphQL and then register a user, and then after that check the database and see if the user is there. So to do this, I was like, alright, it'd be nice to be able to start the server from within my test, right? So I was like, alright, why don't we transform this stuff right here into a function? So I was like, alright, why don't I do like const start server, and then I just wrap all this like that. But the thing is, we're now not, and then also start server like that. So if I were to run this with TS Node, for example, it'd still run the same way as before. But now I can export this function and call it within my test if I wanted to. And then I also want to make this asynchronous while I'm at it. And that way I don't have to use .then here, and I can just use await. So I'm going to await that and my server.start. And then at the end we'll say console.log, everything started up. Okay, so I just kind of like flattened this all out turning it into an asynchronous function and using await here. So now I was like, alright, the first thing I want to do in my test is to start the server. So I'm like, let's start server. And I need to make this asynchronous. So asynchronous. And I was like, alright, let's call this register user. And I was going to create an email up here, so maybe bob@bob.com, and a password, something like that. And then I'm going to write my mutation, and we're just going to do it like this. I'm going to call register, and I'm going to have an email, and the email is going to be like bob@bob.com, right? So we're just going to use the email up there. And I'm also going to do the same thing for the password. Okay, so here's the mutation that I want to run. Here I'm starting the server. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const response is equal to. And what I'm going to do is just call request from GraphQL request. And I'm going to say await, and we're going to request. And here I want to put the basically URL of my server. And this could change and depending on the environment. So I was like, all right, why don't I make a file called constants.ts, and I'll just export the host, which for now is going to be localhost. And then maybe later I'll change this to be an environment variable or something. But now I can just import host from constants here. And then as my second parameter is going to be the mutation or the query that I want to run. And so now it's going to go ahead and we started the server. We're now going to make the GraphQL request to our server. We're going to call this mutation. And then after that, the first thing I wanted to just do was just to expect response and to equal an object that said register and true. So basically registering worked. So I ran this, so yarn test, and it kind of worked, it kind of didn't, and we'll see what I mean by that. So first thing, you can see it spits out all the logs, right, because we started the server. And the second is this thing breaks. So for whatever reason, I get this listening 4000, and I guess it's because we tried starting the server within Jest, and it didn't like that. So I was like, all right, that's fine. I guess it's best not to start the server like this from within Jest, or maybe there's a way around this. Please leave a comment below if you do know how. So my next thought was, all right, I won't use this like start server function like I originally thought. What I'll do is I'll just like start it in another tab. So I'll open the tab up over here, and I'll just say yarn start. So now I have my server started over here, and I can now, in my other tab, do yarn test, and we'll just query the server, and then we'll expect the response. And that seemed to work a lot better. And here we go, cool, we passed the test. So then I was like, all right, I want to make sure it actually inserted the user in the database. So I was like, all right, let's create a connection. And we're going to await that. So this is going to connect to our database, okay. And then after we connect, we're going to say const users, and we're going to use our user entity. So I just imported two things pretty quickly. So I imported create connection from typeorm, and I imported the user from entity user. and I'm going to say user.find, and I'm going to say where email. So I'm basically finding all the users in the database with this email. And then first off, I'm going to expect users to have length 1, right? So really how we want it is this user to only be one user in the database with that name or with that email. And then the next thing is I want to expect, so we'll say const user, we'll just grab that user, and we're going to say to equal at least the email. It should equal the email that we passed in above here, right here. And we also expect the password to be different, right? So not. So we're hashing this password, so it should not be equal to the plain text password that we have here. So those are like a few checks that we can add in. And now I can run yarn test and test this again. And it's going to fail because I've run this a couple times now. So we've created bob@bob.com a couple times. Well, actually a lot of times. So right now I have 15 bob@bobs.coms, but maybe I changed this to tom@bob.com, and we'll see if that works out a little bit better. And cool, we pass. Now, I'm sure if you've done testing before, or if you have worked with some of the stuff before, you know this is a very bad way to do it, at least how I'm doing it right now. And here's what's currently what I think is wrong. First, I'm testing on the same database that I'm developing on, which is a no-no. And I'm not dropping the database before every single test run. So let's write out like a comment of things that I want to change. So first, I should use a test database. Secondly, after I create this test database, whatever I do in the test, I should drop all data once the test is over. So we shouldn't have just like test data sitting in our database after the test is done. And then the other thing, when I start the server, or I shouldn't have to start the server separately. I just run, when I run npm test, or really I'm running yarn test, it also starts the server. So maybe I, in my package.json, I set something up where it automatically starts the server, because we also don't need no daemon to be running while we're testing. So that's a thing. So those are the things that I want to work on next, and that we'll be doing in the next video, is setting these things up. That way we're basically using better practices while testing. And then the other thing also is I shouldn't have to create a connection in every single test. I should basically have like a hook that's like before running tests, create the connection. So that's another thing we'll set up. But also, again, tell me what you think of this. I'm still going to use this type of kind of test where I'm doing a request, but then I'm connecting to the database to check to make sure it's in there. Let me know what you guys think of that. If you think if that's just like a bad idea and I should do this a different way altogether. Or I think this tests it nicely. The thing that I do like about this is that I'm able to send an actual request. So it's going through the server, it's going through the GraphQL engine, and it's going through my resolver. So it's making sure all these things are working nicely together. And like when we start adding cookies and authentication, I can make sure all that is playing nice together. But maybe that should be a separate test. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. But that's it for this video. More will be soon.